Theresa May has warned that Islamic State fighters could slip back into Europe as she became the first British Prime Minister to visit Iraq in almost a decade. During the surprise trip to Baghdad, Mrs. May said Britain would step up efforts to stop jihadists dispersing through the Middle East. The Prime Minister then travelled to Saudi Arabia and met King Salman and his 32-year-old son, who now stands next in line for the throne. Mrs. May's trip to Saudi Arabia was for talks with the King and his heir Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman over the kingdom-led war in Yemen. She is the second European leader to specifically seek out the Crown Prince as he amasses power. May's visit was expected to include her asking Crown Prince Mohammed to allow humanitarian aid through Yemen's port of Hodeidah, which is held by the Shiite rebels being targeted in the Saudi-led war. Saudi King Salman bin Abdulaziz meets with British Prime Minister Theresa May in Riyadh. Mrs. May's trip to Saudi Arabia was for talks with the King and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman over the kingdom-led war in Yemen. Mrs. May touches down and is greeted by the Governor of Riyadh, Faisal bin Bandar Al Saud, who welcomed her to Saudi Arabia and escorted her to meet with King Salman. Mrs. May's trip to Saudi Arabia was for talks with the King, right, and his heir Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman over the kingdom-led war in Yemen. British Prime Minister Theresa May observes a team of Iraqi security forces as they are trained with metal detectors at the Camp Taja in Iraq. The Prime Minister, whose first visit to a war zone had been kept secret, touched down near Baghdad today in an RAF Hercules after flying in from Jordan, pictured. Theresa May met British troops training Iraqi soldiers at Camp Taja near Baghdad today, pictured. Mrs. May was greeted on the runway by Faisal bin Bandar Al Saud, the Governor of Riyadh, who welcomed her to Saudi Arabia and escorted the Prime Minister to her meeting with King Salman. Ahead of the meeting, she told reporters, "I am very concerned about the humanitarian crisis that has developed in Yemen, particularly most recently. That is why one strong message I will be giving to Saudi Arabia is that we want to see Hodeidah port opened for humanitarian and commercial access. That is important. The international community is concerned about the humanitarian crisis in Yemen. Saudi Arabia backs Yemen's internationally recognized government against Iran-backed Houthi rebels, and faces intense condemnation over its bombing and military action. Earlier this month the Saudi-led coalition mounted a sea and air blockade in an effort to prevent supplies reaching Houthi rebels, but has since lifted some of the restrictions. The country is dealing with the outbreak of cholera and the threat of famine. Since the bombing of Yemen began in March 2015, more than £3.3 billion worth of UK arms sales to Saudi Arabia have been licensed. Mrs. May has faced repeated calls to suspend arms sales following claims of breaches of international law in Yemen under the Saudi-led coalition bombing campaign. In Baghdad, Mrs. May stepped into a defense row as she repeatedly refused to guarantee that troop numbers would not be cut as she visited a base where British soldiers are stationed.